is probably the reason why we all came here. This is the class. This is the class on the Africans in North Africa and Europe. But I think also one of the advantages that we have is that it also shows why it's so important, the way in which we were able to develop this class is so important. And again, when we look at certain historians that teach episodic history, you see, as you viewed in this DVD, it's very difficult to understand today if you didn't understand this concept. Going back into enslavement, going back into economy, going back into all these other areas. And one of the things I've learned studying our history and studying the way in which we taught history was what we call corrective history, as opposed to what's called episodic history. You can look at Chicago. I remember a few weeks ago they had a conference in Chicago, and I happened to be going there that week. And it was supposed to be on MSNBC, and it was supposed to be, I think, on a Thursday night. However, something happened and the news was more important, so they didn't show that particular program. They showed it Friday. And I happened to be in Chicago that Friday. And I did a presentation on Saturday where there were people who were in the audience of that program in Chicago came to the presentation where I was. And they talked about the history of Chicago in a way that our program never did. Now, maybe they had the best intentions in doing it to bring light to Chicago. But you could never understand what's happening in Chicago if you didn't understand the history of it. So that our program is like what we call episodic. It was a snapshot of a situation that you looked at, but in no way did you know the history that was before it or what may have happened after. When you look at the conditions that we find ourselves in as it relates to crime, as it relates to drugs, when they had a war on drugs, well, that was a couple of decades too late when they brought the drugs in the first place. And see, this is the challenge. They are now being in New Jersey, you see these commercials on television where you see your governor talking about, how this is such a, so please reach out for help, and it's a disease, and yeah, remember back in the day in our neighborhoods, remember Newark, I remember Harlem, I remember when drugs was brought into the projects where I grew up. I remember the car that would come in. I'm talking about the 60s. And the people that brought it in didn't look like us. The people that picked them up at the car didn't look like us, that were distributed in the projects, but the people that actually brought it in. And you see, this is why I think that we have to look at things differently, so that this is why the curriculum that we're developing and the work that we're doing becomes so important, because we have to stop being episodic. To study the Moors, to understand the Moors is not about taking this class alone. This is the fourth class. The other three classes set the tone in corrective history to understand, how did we get here? How is it? Because considering what you're looking at here and considering what people will tell you about the contributions of African people, for me to do a presentation on the Moors to people who had never been exposed to anything like that before, and all of a sudden I am saying that Africans brought in the arts and sciences, and they brought in music, they built schools, that's episodic. This class is episodic. Okay, so now you're going to tell me this, but all of the other things you needed to know before that weren't put in place. So this seems phenomenal, almost to the point where they would say that I'm ridiculous. So, in setting up the program, in setting up these classes, when I was speaking to those that, Minister Brown, Brother Greg, Sister Iana, talking about how we're going to put this together, I told him, it's not gonna be one class. And I remember, well, how many do you need? And I said, well, let's look at 6. So that we can really flesh this out in a way that you can understand it and it doesn't become episodic. Because other than that, it's episodic. So it's important that we just go back a ways and just look at some of the things that happened over the past 3 classes. And the first class we dealt with what? What was our first class on? Very first class. Please.
Beginnings of man, beginnings of humanity.
Yeah, and when you were exposed to the origins of the human family, one of the first things that was important was to realize that there is only one race on our planet. And I know that there are those who study this history and this culture that don't really want to hear that. They would like to see people of European descent, Eurasian descent as a you can't be related to me. You know, the way you act, the way you conduct yourself, the things that you do. You can't be a part of me. But the challenge in science becomes, then, what are they? Okay, and if we want to say alien, we can say kind of humankind. But there's no way. But science now tells us that they being peoples of Eurasian descent, they belong to the same race as all other human beings. Bone for bone, muscle for muscle, they're all alike. And I also spoke about the ape. A lot of folk got a problem with that, right? Because they don't want to be identified with an ape. And so the idea that has been presented by peoples of European descent in their study, people who have written, the books on the origin of man, Darwin, him being limited by his own scope of we could say white supremacy, or the lack of knowledge, presented the information in a way that was scientifically not necessarily grounded. However, the concepts that he was talking about were very true. Bone for bone, muscle for muscle, gland for gland, organ for organ. Everything that you will find in a human being, you will find in the same place with the same function in a gorilla. Now, science now is really phenomenal, and there's a lot of work to be done. And I tell you right now, don't believe me, because there's so much more work that has to be done to bring this to other levels of understanding, to be more accurate. But it is believed that there is within the brainstem, this is the work of Dr. Richard King, it is believed that in the brainstem there are 12 melanated sites. Now, I'm just going to say it. There are classes where I could show it to you, and I have it on the computer. But if I go back and forth, for now it'll take up too much time, and I really just want to tell it to you so you know. Such areas as the substratum substantia nigra, which means black substance. Substantia, substance, nigra, black. There's another site that's called the locus coeruleus. L-O-C-U-S-C-O-E-R-E, locus coeruleus, C-O-E-R-E-L-O-U-S, coeruleus. C-O-U-R-E-L-E-O-U-S, coeruleus. One is a Sanskrit word, and the other is a Greek word, and it means black dot. And that is where it is believed that in the ape they do not have that well-formulated melanin substance in the locus coeruleus. It is also happened to be a place where in the human, that is where there's a seat of spiritual intelligence. There's a growth in the locus coeruleus. It's called the black dot. 12 melanated sites. And again, you can research Dr. Richard King, his book, The African Origins of Biological Psychiatry, will give you more information. And so and even now, they are working with apes now, and they are able now to begin a process of communication with apes. And it is believed that those entities that came out of the tree from that one common ancestor, some people call Ramapithecus, in staying in the trees, they never had to develop that part of their brain in terms of thinking. Whereas the ones that came down to the earth, because of their new habitat in the grasslands and the way in which they had to survive and thrive, it made them develop their brain so that certain things happened in that part of the brain, specifically when they stood erect. And that opened up the central nervous system.
What's the name of the book?
Richard King, Dr. Richard King. African Origins of Biological, I'm sure that, I think the book may be downstairs. He also wrote another book, Melanin, Key to Freedom. Good book. And there's a whole series. You know, if you email me, I'll send you my book list on that. But the reason why I'm telling you this is because of science. And we have to get to a point where we begin to look at science as the answers to what we want. So when we're looking for the origins of life in Africa, and we ask ourselves, well, you know, why would it be there? Why couldn't it be elsewhere? Then you'd have to understand that the same science that teaches you as it relates to weather and climate, in that weather and climate, there are also laws that dictate that. And the three laws that we talked about was Glosier's law, Allen's law, and Bergman's law. A-L-L-E-N. Bergman was B-E-R-G-M-A-N-N. And Glosier was G-L-O-G-E-R. And these are all laws that deal with pigment, Glosier's law. Allen's law deals with body mass, and Bergman's law deals with limb extensions, morphology. And so these laws tell us that for life to have come into existence the way it did, and for humans to do what they did, it had to have been in a very warm climate. And the laws of melanin then dictate that because of those laws of melanin, then the only place that life could come into existence would be in a warm tropical place. And we are experiencing this as we speak. When we first started these classes in January, we were exposed to a rather harsh climate. Many of us had a particular pigment, but right now we are on the cusp of going into spring. What you're noticing is that in January, the streets were not that crowded, and now you're noticing that they're a lot more crowded. And that is because in this type of weather, people tend to enjoy staying outdoors more. This is common sense now. This is not stuff that we're trying to play with. And as we get into July and August, they may even have to put a curfew on to get people off the street. You don't need no curfew December, January. People will gladly get off the block. But again, this is all laws of science that can be proven just by an everyday living, everyday life. And so there is only one race. And we said at the end, as we were going through this first class, that this human being was conceived, born, nurtured, sustained, educated, civilized in Africa. Developed and created great civilizations. Learned various ways of navigating in their own environment, and then pretty soon they began to travel outside of the continent of Africa, and they peopled the planet. It had to have been a sophisticated, civilized, and intelligent person to do that. They could not have left on a savage level, which John G. Jackson says there are 3 levels of the human family. And again, I'm careful with words, but just to put them in their category so we can understand certain things. And then even their philosophy, their wisdom. You have the savage, the barbarian, and the civilized. Now, we, of course, use these words to denigrate things like that. I'm not using them to denigrate. What I'm basically saying is that on a savage level, human beings lived, their philosophy was what we call superstition. Much of what they did because of belief systems that kept them in line for fear of something happening that would be bad for them. So they followed the law. This is what free will did. See, animals don't have to worry about this. Animals are going to follow nature no matter what, through their instinct. Okay? But as human beings, we have the power of negation. We have the power to tell nature no. And while that could be a good thing, it also many times could be a bad thing. So for the human family to keep themselves in line, following a natural law, they created superstitions, which said, I'll give you a couple that are more updated. Like, for instance, dropping a mirror, you believe you have 7 years bad luck. Okay? But really, the reason why that was put into place was that mirrors were so expensive and so hard to come by. The people wanted you to treat them with such care that you would believe that if you dropped it, you'd have 7 years bad luck. You know, so if you believe you're going to have 7 years bad luck, if you drop that mirror, you are going to just oh so carefully treat that mirror. You see? So it's a superstition. But now if you go back to the early human, which they had superstitions that I may not know of, but they had superstitions that made them follow the law because they were fearful of what the outcome would be. That was the lowest state of philosophy, the lowest state of knowledge. Then when you grow from savage, you go to barbarian. And that's when the human being created what we call religions. And out of these religions, they lived a life for fear of a God concept that would punish them for their behavior. And then when you get to the civilized state, you get to science. And the laws of science reveal a spiritual code. And that you realize that you realize that spirituality is unseen science, and science is seen spirituality. So our ancestors at their highest levels in Africa developed a sacred science, a soul science, where they followed the natural law because they knew it was in the cosmic reality to do so. And I'll give you another example. When I was a teacher, and I used to teach the students, and the students, of course, would give me a warm time. They would misbehave. They would do all sorts of stuff like that. I never called their parents, and I never gave them detention. Now, that would cause some students to take advantage of the situation. Well, he ain't going to call my mother. He ain't going to call grandma. My mother come whip my butt. But he ain't going to call mama, so I ain't worried about it. So that would lead some human beings to misbehave, knowing that they thought there was no punishment for what they were going to do. But what I used to always tell them was, if I give you detention, and if I call your mother, you are going to start to do the right thing because you're afraid of what the repercussions are going to be. I said, if I can do my job, it's my job to be able to show you why you should do the right thing. That's the science of wisdom and knowledge. There is a science to doing the right thing, you know. And this is why you ought to do the right thing. And I would even do certain things in the class to show them how important it was that they realized that there are certain laws that I don't go by. Like, for instance, you could wear your hat in my class. I didn't tell them. I told them, once you leave my class, you better take it off because the principal is going to tear you up. Because I didn't know a scientific reason to tell the children to take their hat off. If I could tell them, look, you'll get a flu, or You won't learn because the hat's too tight on your head. If I could give them a reason why they should take their hat off. But what I told them socially is that in the society that we're living in, it is said that men take their hats off indoors. And if you go for a job, you better take that hat off or you're not going to get that job. So what we do is we're training you so that when you go out into the real world, you'll know the social norms, the social customs, so that you'll be able to obey them. But I really don't care if you put your hat on in my class. I don't care. And this is how I showed them the importance of behavior. Because whether you realize it or not, 1/3 of all incidences in school come from brothers losing their hats. And don't take it off their head. You got a serious fight on your hands if you touch them. Don't touch my hat. I don't even want you to tell me to take it off. But you touch me, that's it. This is the priorities that our young brothers have on their hats. It's very important. This is just the way it is. I mean, whether we like it, whether it's right, whether it's wrong, it has nothing to do with it. It's perception of people with hats. So there was a moral code that people live by. Now here's where the philosophy and the wisdom that's going to come into this come into play. As a savage, you have superstition. That is faith. As a barbarian, you have religion. That's belief. But as civilized, you have the science, which is wisdom and knowledge. You know what drives black people? Black folk don't believe in God. They don't even have faith in God. Black folk know God. But the religion that they adhere to don't allow them to know it. It just makes them believe it or have faith in it. But when you get to a certain scientific level, it's not about belief or faith. It's about science. There are scientific laws that answer the cosmic reality. And our ancestors got to a certain point in their development where they knew this. So the building of the pyramids and the building and structures of Africa and the development of jurisprudence, of law, government, to be able to do the things they did, for them to take this knowledge and bring it into Europe, it was just a natural thing for them. And hopefully if I get to all the reading I want, I'm going to give you a quote that's going to tell you something that I think that those of us who are in this class and those of us who are moving forward, that we have to come to realize. And my bottom line is that this civilization is dying out. It's on its way out. I'm telling you this now. I remember, and I'll use this, and I use this sometimes just for the drama of it. But I remember the day that my mother joined the Ancestors, December 13th, 1983, 9:03 in the evening. And I remember when I entered the room and she was leaving, I would have done anything in the world to let her live. She was young. I really wanted my mother to live. That's how I cared about her. But she was there. And you know, people say, well, you gotta have faith. You gotta have, yeah, you do. You should have faith and you should have hope. But there are certain things that are out. The way in which this civilization was built on murder and mayhem, and the total destruction of the inner soul and inner spirit of the individual, where with all that we've been through over the past 500 years, that you literally could have the coming of Christopher Columbus Part 2, which is Donald Trump. To think that we could go back so far to have people like Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General means that this civilization has learned nothing. And if it is to be, it's going to have to be up to us. We are going to have to do this. We who are, and I'm not just saying it as a cultural thing, I'm saying it as human beings, we have to come to grips with the fact that what we're seeing happening to mothers being ripped off streets away from their children to be sent back to Mexico or to Central or South America, knowing that the largest numbers of people who are the ones that come to this country and are, if they want to call them illegal aliens, are Asians. And they don't come across the border, they come by plane. They just don't go back home. And we know this. But why are we on the border? Why are we chasing and doing all of this? So what kind of civilization is this? Our ancestors, when they left Africa, were on a higher level of consciousness than the people we're dealing with right now. And we as black folk are sitting here, despite what they did, don't you see why they do this? Don't you see that they see that if we ever got into control, we would change this whole dynamic? You see what made Trump come into existence? We had it in our hands with Barack Obama. And they said, oh no, we are going to do what? Make America white again. That was the code words that they used. Great again. Means we're going to go back. Remember when black people were in their place, when law and order was in place, when black folk were enslaved, and when we put them in prison? This is what we want back. These are the code words. Frances Cress Welsing told us this. She said Trump's going to win. She said this in, I think, well, she transcended in what, January, late December? She said this November, sometime in the presentation. She said, listen to what he's saying, and you'll see why he's going to win. So it's here. And our ancestors in the first class developed a structure and a foundation that not just was showing how life came out of Africa, but it was also attempting to stabilize the fact that African people brought the world wisdom and knowledge. And don't be afraid of claiming it. I used to always proudly tell people, yeah, I'm a nerd. They say, oh, you're acting white because you're intelligent. No, I'm acting black because I'm intelligent. We've lost that. You know, we actually have put intelligence in someone who has no sense whatsoever, and we were the one that brought the schools. We'll talk about today in next class. The sciences and the arts, we brought that to the world. So, the second class that we had did what? What did we talk about during the second class? First class was the origin of life in Africa. That stabilized the fact that there's one race, and that was African. The second class, what did we talk about? Class number 2.
Moors from prehistory.
Say again?
Moors from prehistory.
Moors from prehistory.
The Moorish dynasty.
And what were some of the things that we said about that?
Who are the Moors?
Okay.
Where did the Moors come from?
And what basically geographically did we focus on?
Mediterranean.
The Mediterranean. See, because what we wanted to do was leave what we call inner Africa and show how Africans moved up and literally went to the Mediterranean basin. Okay? Went to the Mediterranean basin and populated that. The Kushites populated that. They were there. We then wanted to identify the countries of the Mediterranean so that we would have no doubt as to what countries we're talking about, because that becomes very important. Because when Napoleon years later is going to say that Africa begins at the Pyrenees, which are the mountains that separate France from Spain, then you'll understand why he said what he said, because it was obvious that the people that he was coming in contact with in France were black. But that's left out the history books, and that's something Napoleon said. So we talked about the countries of France, Monaco, Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, Syria, Israel, Lebanon, Libya. These were all Malta, Tunisia, and Morocco. And that becomes very important when we're dealing with the Mediterranean. All this area here, the Mediterranean basin, the sea here, was all inhabited by Cushites, all inhabited by Africans. Before there were any Europeans in this area, Eurasians didn't exist at this time. They were nowhere in this area. They were still in the northern confines of the mountains of Europe. This is what we have to know before we talk about the Moors in Spain. But there's something else I'm going to show you about Africans in Europe today. But it became important that we looked at this, that Africans would be here. But then we have to show something else. And so what else did we show? What was the third class? What did we talk about the third class?
Carthage and Numidia.
There we go, Carthage and Numidia. Because now here in Carthage and Numidia, you're going to be looking at a people that first and foremost, we talked about the Garamantes. The Garamantes were the original Africans that were in this area, that would come up the Nile Valley and go west. And they would populate this area. And in populating this area, they are going to move across and bring the same civilization that we're talking about, the same culture, the science, the arts, building of buildings, eating of foods, agricultural science, all of these different subject areas, all these different studies, they're going to bring and they're going to swing across the entire north and northwest part of Africa. But to do this, we had to show, using essays, what the kingdoms of Carthage and Numidia were. And then we had to find where they were. And so this is the same map I showed you before. Now, Numidia is where Mauritania basically is, give or take. And Carthage is where Tunis is. Please.
Said Mauritania is where Numidia was?
Mauritania is the area right here is where let me go back to the other map. See right here? Here's Numidia right here. Can you see where I'm circling?
Yeah, that wasn't Morocco.
Well, yes, Morocco.
It was the same.
You see, the thing about Morocco and Mauritania, and see again, what we have to do is the countries that we talk about today in Africa exist as of 1885 at the Berlin Conference.
Right.
So that my concept is we have to be very careful when we talk about countries. We're talking about 55 something countries. No, they were carved up for political and economic reasons by the powers of Europe. 1885, the Berlin Conference. Belgium, and it was really spurred by Belgium, who went into the Congo. And so the countries we today call Mali, Ghana, Burkina Faso, Sudan, Chad, those are all carved up. Those are geopolitical, economic carvings up. So when we're dealing with, if you're talking about the geographic location of where it is Morocco. But there are aspects of Numidia that were in Mauritania. What I'm trying to show is that this is the area here that you're dealing with. Okay? And you're going to come into areas such as here, which is Ceuta, Numidia, Morocco. Here you have Carthage is up here in Tunis. But what you have to focus on is this whole area, Mauritania, Morocco, are all related. That's why they all sound alike. Okay? But geographically speaking, you're correct. It is Morocco. But the whole area was known as the land of the so-called Moors, which came because of the Punic Wars. the Punic Wars, coming from the basic Roman word, from the Greek word, means purple, Phoenicia. Here, all this area here is where the Punic Wars are going to take place. Okay? Here is Carthage, and over here is Numidia. Okay? Geographically speaking, we're talking about Morocco. Coming down here, we're talking about Mauritania. All in this area here, you're going to deal, and I'm going to show you some maps as we move on. But this is the Mediterranean basin, and this is where the war is going to take place. In the southern part of Spain here, here is Ceuta, and we're going to come back, because right here on the diagonal is where you're going to see Al-Andalusia, which is going to be where the Moors are eventually going to go to and remain. And so that was the class that we looked at last time, talking about the Garamantes, Carthage, and Numidia, and talking about the rise of African knowledge and wisdom, even at the same time that no one ever talks about it, because they're still trying to depict Hannibal as something other than African. Okay? So, here we come to our class now. Now, you've been exposed to Carthage, you've been exposed to Numidia, the Garamantes, so we now see who the people were that would come forward. We now understand who the Berbers were. We understand who the North Africans were. We have a sense of Eurasians that are going to come down and mix with the people of North Africa. That's going to change the pigment of the people. But no major change in pigment is going to happen until Eurasians come through Islam. So you're still dealing with a very pigmented people. You have touches of different complexions, and pretty much the way we are today in terms of our complexions, but you're dealing with a base of African people. And so basically what we're looking at, to understand, just as a overview, is the Moors of North Africa and Europe and the Moorish civilization. Again, we talked about early North Africans. In the future, what I would do, and I encourage you, in the Golden Age of the Moor, there's a essay on the African contributions to Islam. There's also a book that's titled Egyptian Sacred Science and Al-Islam. Because we really have to understand where the knowledge and wisdom of the Quran came from. And there is evidence. Also, there's a brother, Dr. Wesley Muhammad, who wrote a book, Black Arabia, which is interesting also. And it talks about Islam as a faith system and where it came from and who were the thinkers of it and who developed it. And one of the great challenges, I think, same thing I do with Christianity, many of our brothers and sisters in the Nation of Islam, Wesley Muhammad is one of them, but I just wish they understood that Islam is a philosophy that came out of the hills of Ethiopia. I just wish that they understood that. And that the language that we call Arabic came from an African by the name of Antara. He was a poet. And most poets and writers are the ones that give language their grammar and syntax. You would think that they come from people who sit down and think about, well, here's a perfect sentence. in English, or here's a perfect sentence in Arabic, but it doesn't. It comes from, and this is why rap becomes so important. Because rap in many ways is the same poet play on words, developing the structure of the language. And then out of that structure and out of the play on words, you start defining things and you start having meanings towards things and you start to punctuate things. But first punctuations don't come by marks, they come by the inflection of your voice. And what you're noticing is that rap has gotten so deep. See, because my conversations with Henrik, the things I learned about rap, not just from my own family, but from the children that I taught with, is that they say, you see, our generation, look, I'm Smokey Robinson, okay? I am word heavy, okay? I'm thinking word, right? And I'm thinking about the poetry of love and the poetry of survival and struggle. I'm thinking about, but rap uses words to create beats. See, to me, beats was the background to the word. What rap does, it takes the word and makes it the music. You see? Now, me being who I am in my generation, I had to work on that concept to understand the philosophy of it. Now, I'm not talking about the words that are being used, because even when they curse or they use words that we think are inappropriate, okay, they are, and they do send subliminal messages, but from a certain perspective, they're not using the word as a curse, they're using it as a beat. To me, I can't handle that. Because what you say, you mean. But there's another generation that has taken this thought process, and as an elder generation, we have to look at it and understand certain things about it. You see, please, brother.
It's like with Tupac, you know, I love Pac, and the things he say, it had to be, I mean, I'm from Brooklyn, Brownsville, you know, I'm from the corner, whatever, and I heard Tupac, and everything made sense to me. Like, I never seen back struggle from, like, any other person from Tupac. But then I read Malcolm X's book from Tupac. He said, Malcolm X trained me. So that's what got me to the point that I want to read Malcolm, and I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And brother, how about sci-fi? What's that song? That's going to help all young brothers and sisters learn every country in Africa. What's that?
Sahara Prince.
Sahara Prince. Okay, he got something out.
That's great.
That has almost, I think, maybe every African country he names, and he does it in a way. Now, okay, now some of the things he says, okay, all right. In the song, when you're listening to it, my generation say, well, now, why do you have to say that? But the thing is that if that can lead you to learn the countries of Africa, and if that's the tool that you use for it,
Right.
then it might lead you to study Malcolm. Or it might lead you to study Africa. You see, there's an entry point that we have to now look at that is very different. Antara was the one that gave what we call Arabic its syntax. And because you have to ask yourself, how could a religion be formed in the 600s? And all of a sudden, almost overnight, not overnight, but almost overnight, there is a language that is, because Islam is one of the few religions that you must pray in that language. See, we can pray in English, we can pray in Spanish. In the beginning, it used to be Latin. You could only speak, Catholic was Latin. But Islam, you must speak. If you're a Chinese Muslim, you must speak Arabic. Okay? If you're a Native American and you're a Muslim, you have to speak Arabic. Arabic is specific to the religion. How could a language be created to suit the religion? And how could it permeate parts of the world? And it's called the Arabic language. But it didn't start in Arabia. It started in Ethiopia, and it was brought into Medina, into Mecca, and that became an established wisdom when the first place that these individuals went was to Egypt and studied Kemet. And out of that came the philosophy of Islam. And that's why the book by Thomas Goodwin and Rafiq Bilal, the Egyptian Sacred Science and Al-Islam, is so important because it shows you where literally almost step by step you can see Egyptian science in Islam. Like for instance, you have Ma'ad in Islam and you have Ma'at in Kemetic. Allah. No one tells you that Allah, the God of Islam, is a woman named Alat, who was the patron of Mecca because she was in charge of the astronomical observatory, of which we have the last remnant of this astrological observatory that was in Mecca. Ma'at Ka, the spirit of Ma'at, is the Kaba stone.
Black stone.
The black stone that you, when you Hajj and you circle 7 times. Why 7 times? That's the same thing you do when you go to Karnak. And there's a Kepra dung beetle that you do the same kind of ritual. And so that's why when we look at what Africans are going to bring into Europe, we have to understand a lot of people who are looking at the Eurasian Muslim today, the Saddam Husseins and all the others, believe that that is what Islam. That is a convert to Islam. That is not the original Muslim. The original Muslim were black people that had a combined civilization between what we call Saudi Arabia and Ethiopia, and there was a direct relationship in the kingdom of Saba. Please, brother.
It's like black people, every time we get into a religion, we masterify it. You know that. Like, when it comes to Christianity, we do it the best. When it comes to Islam, we do it the best. We have the most hardship when it comes to, things in this world. I mean, are we doing something wrong? Or, like, what do you think that black people do? I think black people just need to be more unified,
Yes. And they need to realize the foundations and roots of these things.
Right.
And not try to get people to validate them.
Absolutely.
We spend, say again?
Knowledge of self, you're trying to conform to something that's not designed for you. So essentially, you suffer because you seek something that is, me looking out into the world and realizing that the world is not outside of myself, the world is in me. Once I separate myself from the world, then I start to find myself and realize that it was in me all along. You're searching for parts of you, fragmented parts of you and everyone else. And you can't do that.
And in so many ways, my sister, that is what makes us attracted to those faith systems because we gave it to them in the first place. Mm-hmm. But as you say, when they took it, see, this is why I say I have no challenges with any religion. I have a problem with the interpretation of them. Because when they were contorted and contaminated, they were built against me. Because the people that contaminated them knew they got it from me. So they had to lock me out of the images of it. So when you look at a Buddha, when you look at the original Buddha, he is not a heavily set man sitting with a bald head and belly extended. That's not Buddha. That's not the original Buddha.
Absolutely.
You travel all across the East, you don't see that. When you look at Krishna, Krishna is straight up black.
Absolutely.
You can see it, okay? But when you see that Hare Krishna thing going on, you don't see any of that. We out Buddha. We out Krishna. We out Christianize Christians. But that's because we see that we are at the corner of it, and normally we always take it and make it something that it is, so that even the original people can't identify and don't want to identify with the Nation of Islam. Because what Noble Drew Ali and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad did was they re-Africanized it. So that then Islam, according to the Nation of Islam, was looked at as, oh, that's not what we practice. Mm-hmm. But no, what the original was is not what we practiced either. Because never, one of the greatest problems that was in Moorish Spain was the role that women played in the society. Because the Eurasians said, look, your woman got too much power. I saw you building this temple the other day, and I saw women part of the building process. How you got that woman up in there? She's supposed to be in the kitchen. That brother said, you go tell her. I ain't telling her nothing, because I know what she's going to do. You tell her that. And so these are signs of the role that we have played in these concepts, and it becomes very important that as we develop this and understand Islam. So that's one of the things that we have to look at. But what I want to do, and then the next part is going to be the music and the importance of understanding music. And I want to make sure that we can get to some of the things that I want to look at. The resource guide, basically, the way I developed it is that the book that we're using is The Golden Age of the Moor. My brother, please, can you just hold the book up, because I left mine at home. Okay, yeah, The Golden Age of the Moor. It's a phenomenal book. And I use it as a base because unlike books by Joseph McCabe or Stanley Lane Poole, which are also very good, it's one author giving you one idea. Golden Age of the Moor has a collection of some of the greatest minds as it relates to the Moors. And so I encourage us to look at it. And then the code is on the left-hand side here is the author's initials, and then the essay that they wrote. And we're going to go through a couple of them today, just to refine some of the things that we're talking about. But here basically is a timeline of the Moors in Spain. And basically you're dealing with a timeline of from 710 to 1492 AD. 710 to 1492. And this is another reason why you have to ask yourself, why all of a sudden do you have this rise of knowledge? And that is because in the movement of Africans moving in with Islam, they move into Spain about 710. 630 is around the time that you're going to see the creation of this so-called faith system, this religion that we call Islam, the way of peace, and Muslim, people of peace, which is when you hear people talk about, fanatical Islam, the very word itself means peace. Is salam, assalamu alaikum, I come in peace, which comes directly from Em Hotep, which means I come in peace. Em Hotep. Assalamu alaikum means peace. Okay? That's not to say that some of the people who pretend to practice Islam are peaceful. But you talk about a fanatical religion, talk to black folk. Black folk know fanatical religion. In fact, that's how we got to this country. Was a fanatical, it just happened to be Christianity. Okay?
Can I ask you one question?
Please, brother.
So you think that Malcolm had the antidote to racism that's going on and that's going on here, because everything he said it's like a mirror to what's going on from 1964 to 1965 to what's going on right now. It's like a mirror. It's like a mirror. I mean, it ain't changed all them years. So it's mind-boggling how somebody could know so much at that time. And
you know what I believe? Well, this is a Kaba thought, because you asked me what do I think. So I'm going to give you my thought, and I'm going to talk about religion. I'm in the process of writing a book on spirituality before religions, which has made me go deep inside, not just studying other religions, but going inside of myself.
Right.
And I believe that when Islam says that all humans are Muslims, they are telling the truth. Not the religious kind. But what I have found is that spirituality is a philosophical way of thinking. Philosophy means the love of wisdom. It is a way of looking at the world through your God eyes, your Ra eyes.
Right.
Okay? When you do that, you use your system as a mantra to take you to levels of consciousness. And I believe that Malcolm used Islam to be able to focus on his genius. And that's what all spiritual systems should do. That's why I don't care what religion you are. It doesn't make a difference. I don't care. Because people say, you know, you Christian, yeah. You Muslim, yeah. You Jew, yeah. Yeah, I'm all that. I'm agnostic to Zoroastrian because I'm African. And all those religions came out of an African mind.
Right.
So I'm all that. So I think that Malcolm was probably the purest form of a Muslim. I think that Martin Luther King was the purest form of a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it doesn't make a difference. It's what your spiritual system allows you to come out and do. And so I believe that Malcolm was somebody who was able to use the system. He was waiting for it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, brilliant man that he was, came at a most opportune time in Malcolm's life.
Right.
By divine intervention.
Mm-hmm.
Got him at the most important time of his life, when he was most vulnerable in prison. When he had been stripped down to almost nothing. See, this is one of the good things about the military. Because when I was in the military, that basic training, they strip you down. You become a non-person, and then they build you to be who they want you to be. That's what spirituality is meant to be. Spirituality, to me, in my study, is meant to take you to the level where you're at the 0-0 mark, and everything that you are inside now comes out. And both Malcolm and Martin Luther King showed it in a unique, two different religions, and sometimes battling each other.
Mm.
But there is a symbol in ancient Kemet where you'll see one body with two heads.
Mm-hmm.
One of them has Satan, and the other has Heru. And they're both facing in opposite directions, but they're both on the same body.
On the same path.
Same path, but two drastic views of looking at the same road. And they're both going there because they got one left foot, one right foot.
Mm-hmm.
They got two heads, but one body.
Mm-hmm.
Which was symbolic that we all have to get there together.
Yeah. You know, it's unfortunate that we don't do that as black people.
It's unfortunate we don't do that as people.
Man, I mean, if you really think about it, brother, it's like Italians, Irish, everybody get together when it comes to business. With black people, we don't do it.
Yeah.
We don't support each other.
Well, some of us do. Some of us don't.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that do are the 3 out of 100 I'm looking for.
Absolutely.
Because, look, if after all we've been through,
Mm-hmm.
we still don't see this as our this building, source of knowledge.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This is our this is our house of, our temple of life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, my sister Bay, last class or the class before, you said, what do we do? Okay, and I was talking about when the brothers from the Nation of Islam come on Sundays to think in terms of co-ops, food co-ops, and things like that. You know, the other thing is that we should establish in our minds right now that the source of knowledge will only get better.
Absolutely.
It will only get better.
Yes, sir.
And that is not a question of do you need our support? It's an idea that you support.
Absolutely.
You see, we always wait for someone to need our support before we support them. The concept is we all need each other's support. And you know as well as I do, once you leave this building and you go out there, it's a hostile world.
Absolutely.
Not only from people that don't look like you, but unfortunately at times from people that do look like you.
Absolutely.
The cornerstones to the destruction of the Moorish Empire was just that. We were fighting amongst ourselves.
Yeah, lack of knowledge.
People how to love you. If you don't know how to love yourself, and you can't teach someone else how to love you, and you do that not by what you say, but how you live. So if you love and then you guide and you support, that energy that you're putting out, you're going to get back to yourself. So you can't continue to say we don't support black people or we don't support people that look like us. Then support and then be around like-minded people, and then they're gonna say, oh, you support that store. I know such and such go down and get their books, and they're gonna go. So you do that in your action and in your words. But if you're constantly saying black people don't support black people, then what's going to happen? You're speaking it, and it's going out into the universe, and it's materializing, it's manifesting. You can't say negative things and expect positive. So your words and the way you live and the way you eat and the way you think has to change. Everything, your whole being. Just like you said, I was in the military too. When they break you down, they
Yeah.
break you down to your core. You're again a seed in the belly of the beast, and then outsprout of the rose from concrete. You have to be that. You have to embody that. So you can't constantly think and speak and eat and think something is going to change. You can't ask somebody for change if you want change. You change.
Sister,
And the change is going to happen.
absolutely. Can I have something to say about that?
What?
Positively.
I mean, of course, but it's going to take dedication. It's going to take.
But then you do it. If you're doing it, that's your dedication. You can't
It's
continue
going
to
to. It's
do
going to
it.
take hard work. It's going to take that. You can't look at the media and see what's going on with the black man and say this is what black man is supposed to be. You can't look at movies
But
and
the
say what the
sun isn't
movies
worried
is real.
about the moonshine,
It's going
it
to take
just
dedication.
They do.
It just shines. You know
It's
what
gonna
I'm
take
saying? It's
dedication.
not worried about what that person is doing. They're going to continue to do that.
I understand
Then, but if you can't govern yourself, you can't police your community. You can't do these things if you're not doing it for yourself. I can't say, oh man, the street's dirty. Then I need to get up in the morning and sweep the streets. It's clean. It's done. I can't complain about there being dishes in the sink. Get in there and clean the dishes. I can't. A wise man knows that he knows nothing. Like you can't. I'm not going to argue with the fool. Then I'll become
But
the
like
fool.
Malcolm, I understand.
I'm going to
Sister.
become the fool. So
Sister.
I'm going to stop arguing with you. You want to be right, be right.
But sister, but start.
You can't get upset when I'm correcting you. I'm correcting you because I love you and I love you unconditionally and I don't want
I
you
love
to
you
go down the wrong
Yeah,
path.
but-
So I'm correcting. Let me correct you and take the lesson and keep going.
Yeah, we want the lesson.
But like Malcolm said, it starts at the grassroots.
We're starting now, and you're
At
still
the
trying to fight the
grassroots.
person.
What we're doing right now, start the grassroots.
There we go.
This is an example of what we're talking about. This is an example of what it is that we're talking about and what we have to do as a people. And we're focusing on learning about our ancestors and a great civilization that they created so that we can also do the same thing. Because when our early family from the very beginnings were first trying to get themselves together, they didn't have all the things that we have. Their battle may not have been white supremacy. Their battle was just surviving things that were out there. Lions and tigers and bears. Well, not bears, but animals.
Right.
It was the elements when they were trying to find a way to build houses. These things were and will always have these things. But our ancestors were able to do this. And so what we have to do and what I believe we have to do is we have to build. We have to do this. We have to do this. And we cannot depend on other people. And I think that might be the beauty in this. Because you see, we've gone through 8 years of cussing out President Barack Obama because he didn't do anything for us.
Yeah.
But you know the bottom line was he wasn't supposed to do nothing for us.
All right.
We're supposed to do it for ourselves.
Absolutely.
What he did was he created an environment where we could do for ourselves.
Get your rope.
I didn't ask you to, James Brown, I don't want no one to give me
Clam up.
nothing, just open up the door, I get it myself.
Absolutely.
Because anything that someone else gives you is really not yours, and if it is yours, it's yours only because they gave it to you.
A
But
fishing pole.
if you get it, if you achieve it, then you can put that badge on you and say that I did this, and I have a right to it.
Absolutely.
And that becomes very important for us as a people as we move forward. And the Moors are an example of from 710 until 1492, you had 3 different dynasties. You had the Umayyad and the Abbasid, which existed between 710 and 1086. I did the math for you.
Thank you.
They ruled for 376 years, longer than the United States of America has existed. See, when we're looking at the condition we find ourselves, this is a young stuff here. This is young stuff, and they didn't even get it right. They didn't even get it right in perpetuity for their own children, you know. And my question is, are you paying more for a loaf of bread today than you did 10 years ago?
Absolutely.
If you find that you're paying more for less, the civilization is moving backwards.
Absolutely.
A civilization where you're getting